every night that you have stopped noticing. The lights go off, the room goes quiet, and before sleep takes you, your eyes fix on a single point above your head. A ceiling. A blank, textureless, meaningless surface. And you stare at it. Not reading it, not searching it, just staring. For minutes sometimes. Sometimes longer. And you've never once asked yourself the question that should terrify you a little. Why there? Why that exact spot? Why does the human brain every single night choose to lock itself onto the one part of the room that has absolutely nothing to offer it? You'd think, logically, that a tired brain would simply shut down, close the eyes, drift, end the day cleanly, the way a machine powers off. But that's not what happens. Before sleep arrives, something else takes over. Something deliberate. Something old. Your eyes stay open. Your body goes still. And your mind enters a strange, suspended state that scientists have studied for decades without ever fully agreeing on what it actually is. You are not awake. You are not asleep. You are somewhere in between, a place with no name in everyday language. A place your brain visits every single night of your life, and yet a place you have almost no memory of ever truly experiencing. This in-between state has a name in neuroscience. It's called the hypnagogic state, and what happens inside it is far stranger than anyone assumes. Researchers who study this transition have found that the brain, in those final minutes before sleep, doesn't relax in the way we imagine. It doesn't go quiet. It goes loud, internally. Activity in certain regions spikes. Thoughts loosen from their normal logical structure. Images appear unprompted. Sounds emerge with no source. People report hearing their name called in an empty room. People report seeing faces that aren't there. And the ceiling, that blank, featureless surface above your head, becomes something your brain uses for a purpose you've never consciously understood. It becomes a screen, not metaphorically, functionally. The visual cortex, deprived of new information from a darkened room, doesn't simply go dark itself. It starts generating its own content. Faint shapes, drifting patterns. The biological term for this is phosphines, internally generated visual noise that the brain often tries to organize into something meaningful, the same way it organizes clouds into faces or static into shapes. And it projects this activity onto the nearest neutral surface available, which for almost every human being lying in bed is the ceiling. You are not just staring at the ceiling. You are watching your own mind, in real time, attempting to render something out of nothing. But that's only the beginning. Because the deeper question isn't why your eyes land there. It's why your mind seems to need this moment at all. Why, before sleep takes you, your brain insists on this strange pause, this quiet, staring ritual, instead of simply letting go. To understand that, you have to go back further than neuroscience. You have to go back to a time before electricity, before walls, before ceilings even existed in the form we know them. For most of human history, the last thing a person saw before sleep wasn't a blank plaster surface 6 feet above a mattress. It was the sky. The open night. Thousands of stars scattered across a black expanse that stretched farther than the eye could measure. Every human being who ever lived, for hundreds of thousands of years, fell asleep underneath that view. It wasn't decoration. It was the final input the brain received before shutting down for the night. The sky was the last thing the ancestral mind processed before crossing into unconsciousness. And brains do not forget patterns like that easily. Evolution does not erase a ritual that lasted hundreds of thousands of years just because architecture changed. The behavior is still there, embedded in the nervous system, even though the stimulus is gone. You don't look at the sky anymore. You look at a ceiling. But the part of your brain responsible for this final nightly ritual doesn't know the difference. It performs the same procedure it has always performed, searching a blank overhead surface for meaning, for pattern, for closure, even though there's nothing there to find anymore. This is where it gets unsettling, because if the behavior is ancient, if it's wired so deep into the nervous system that it survived the transition from open sky to drywall and plaster, then the question becomes, what was that ritual actually for? What was the ancestral brain doing every night, lying beneath that endless field of stars before it allowed itself to lose consciousness. The answer that's emerged from sleep research is darker than most people expect. Falling asleep, biologically speaking, is an act of extraordinary vulnerability. For nearly the entire history of life on Earth, becoming unconscious meant becoming defenseless. No awareness, no reaction time, no ability to flee or fight. For an early human lying on open ground, sleep was the most dangerous several hours of the entire day. And the brain evolved a specific behavior to manage that danger: a final scan, a last sweep of the environment before surrendering control. The eyes would rise, lock onto the open sky, and the mind would run one last check. Is it safe? Is it quiet? Is anything moving? Is anything wrong? Before allowing the body to go under. That scan never disappeared. It just lost its object. You still run it every night. Your eyes still rise. Your mind still performs the same ancient vigilance protocol your ancestors used to survive nights in open landscape, except now there's no sky to scan, no horizon to check, no movement to detect. Just a blank, motionless ceiling that gives the ritual nothing to work with. And so your brain keeps staring, keeps scanning, keeps waiting for information that will never come, because the information it's looking for stopped existing thousands of years ago. But that's not the only thing happening in that suspended staring moment, because something else occurs in the hypnagogic state that researchers have found even more difficult to explain. As the brain shifts from waking logic into sleep, it begins to lose what's called top-down inhibition, the normal control your conscious mind exerts over random, intrusive thoughts. During the day, this inhibition works constantly, filtering out irrelevant images, blocking unwanted memories, keeping your attention locked onto whatever task is in front of you. But as you drift toward sleep, that filter weakens, and what surfaces in its absence is not random. It's something your conscious mind has been suppressing all day. This is why, in that ceiling-staring moment, certain thoughts seem to appear from nowhere: an unresolved conversation, a worry you've been avoiding, a memory you didn't choose to think about, a face, a name, a feeling you couldn't quite place earlier in the day, now rising fully formed, demanding attention you have no energy left to give it. The ceiling becomes less of a visual target and more of a stage. And what performs on that stage is whatever your conscious mind worked hardest to keep backstage during the daylight hours. This is where everything changes, because this means the moment you spend staring at the ceiling before sleep isn't empty. It isn't wasted time. It isn't your brain simply winding down. It's the one moment in your entire day when your psychological defenses are low enough for the truth to surface. The version of you that exists during the day, productive, composed, performing for other people, managing impressions, controlling reactions, that version is offline. And what's left staring up into the dark is something closer to the actual contents of your mind. Unfiltered, unmanaged, undisguised. Most people have felt this without naming it. The strange honesty that arrives right before sleep. The moment when a problem you dismissed all day suddenly feels enormous. The moment when a person you haven't thought about in months appears uninvited in your thoughts. The moment when a quiet dread you didn't acknowledge during your busy afternoon suddenly fills the entire room. This isn't your imagination running wild. This is your brain, finally given the silence and stillness it needs, surfacing what it's been carrying the whole time. And here's something almost nobody talks about. Researchers studying the hypnagogic state have found that this period of reduced cognitive control isn't just passive, it's productive. Some of history's most significant ideas, scientific breakthroughs, creative insights, sudden emotional clarity have been traced back to this exact transitional window. Salvador Dali famously used it deliberately, holding a spoon over a metal plate as he drifted toward sleep, letting himself fall just far enough into the hypnagogic state to access its strange associative imagery before the sound of the spoon hitting the plate woke him. Thomas Edison did something nearly identical with steel balls in his hands. Both men understood, intuitively, that this in-between state contained something the fully conscious mind couldn't reach. A kind of mental terrain accessible only in that suspended, ceiling-staring moment between waking and sleep. But this raises a more uncomfortable question. If this state is where unfiltered truths and unexpected insights surface, what does it mean that you avoid it? Because most people do. Most people fill that exact window, the minutes before sleep, with anything except silence. A phone screen, a video, a podcast, anything to prevent the moment from arriving unguarded. And if you've ever wondered why falling asleep with your phone in hand feels different from falling asleep in true darkness and silence, this is why. You're not just delaying sleep. You're avoiding the version of yourself that only appears when the noise stops. This is the part that should genuinely disturb you. Because if the hypnagogic state is when your unfiltered mind finally gets a voice, then a constant, deliberate disruption of that state, scrolling, watching, listening, anything to avoid the silence, isn't just a modern habit. It's a kind of psychological avoidance happening on a scale never seen before in human history. For nearly all of human existence, that quiet pre-sleep window was unavoidable. There was no screen to retreat into, no infinite scroll to distract the mind from itself, just darkness, stillness, and whatever surfaced. Modern humans are the first generation in the history of the species who can reliably, nightly, prevent themselves from ever entering that state fully. And many of us do, every single night. What does it mean that an entire civilization has learned how to outrun a moment of psychological honesty that every human being before us was forced to sit inside? This is where the deeper implication starts to surface. Because the ceiling staring moment was never really about the ceiling at all. It was never about ancestral sky scanning or visual noise or evolutionary vigilance. Those are the mechanisms. They explain how the moment happens, but they don't explain what the moment means to you, specifically on the nights when you actually let yourself stay inside it. On those nights, the nights without a phone in hand, without a video playing, just you, the dark, and a blank ceiling above your head, something happens that has nothing to do with biology and everything to do with identity. You meet yourself. Not the version of you that exists for other people, not the version constructed for meetings, conversations, social media, performance, the version that exists when there's no one left to perform for, no task demanding focus, no noise to hide inside, just the raw, unmanaged contents of a mind finally given permission to surface. And for many people, this is deeply uncomfortable, not because anything is wrong with them, but because most people, most of the time, are almost never alone with their own minds in this way. The ceiling staring moment is one of the only times in modern life when total internal honesty becomes unavoidable. And this is where the existential weight of all this lands. Because the question was never really, why do you stare at the ceiling before sleeping? The real question is, what does it say about a person, about a species, that we built an entire civilization optimized to prevent that exact moment from happening? What does it mean that silence has become something many people actively engineer their lives to avoid? What does it mean that an entire generation falls asleep to noise specifically because true quiet has become unbearable? Sleep researchers have noted something striking in recent years. Rates of reported racing thoughts before bed have increased significantly. Not because human minds have changed, human brains function essentially the same way they did 10,000 years ago. What's changed is the relationship between the mind and silence. For most of history, people had practiced sitting inside quiet, unstimulated moments, walking long distances with nothing to look at, sitting by fires with nothing to do, lying beneath an open sky with nothing demanding attention. The mind had constant, repeated training in tolerating its own unfiltered content. Modern life has almost completely removed that training, which means when silence finally does arrive, at the one moment of the day that cannot be avoided, the moment right before sleep, the unfiltered mind feels less like a familiar visitor and more like an intruder. Loud. Overwhelming. Sometimes frightening. This is why so many people describe the moments before sleep as anxious rather than peaceful. It's not that more is wrong in their lives than in previous generations, it's that they've lost the daily practice of sitting with their own minds in stillness, and the ceiling-staring window has become, for many, the only unavoidable encounter with that stillness they have left. A single, narrow gap in an otherwise fully occupied day. And into that narrow gap pours everything that had nowhere else to go. But there's something almost beautiful hidden inside this discomfort if you're willing to look at it differently. Because the racing thoughts, the sudden worries, the unresolved conversations replaying themselves against the blank ceiling above your head, these aren't malfunctions. They're not your mind failing to relax properly. They're information. They're your psyche's only remaining opportunity in an oversaturated, overstimulated modern life to tell you what it's actually been carrying. The ceiling becomes a confession booth with no priest, a mirror with no reflection, a place where, for a few unguarded minutes each night, the truth gets to speak without interruption, simply because there's nothing left to interrupt it. And maybe this reframes the entire experience. Maybe staring at the ceiling before sleep was never something to escape. Maybe it was never a problem to be solved with a phone, a show, a distraction loud enough to drown it out. Maybe it was always meant to be the one daily appointment with yourself that nothing else gets to interrupt. The one space where the performed version of you finally steps aside and lets the real one speak, even if only for a few minutes, even if what it says is uncomfortable, even if you'd rather not hear it. Because here's the deepest implication of all. If the version of you that appears in that quiet, staring moment, unfiltered, undefended, finally honest, is the version that surfaces only when every distraction has been stripped away, then that version might be closer to who you actually are than the one who walks through the rest of your day. Not because the daytime version is fake, but because it's curated, managed, built for an audience. The ceiling-staring version has no audience. No one is watching, no impression to manage. And what's left, in that absence of performance, might be the closest thing to truth you encounter all day. This is why the moment matters so much more than it appears to. This is why your eyes still rise to that blank surface every single night, even now, even in a world with no stars overhead and no danger to scan for. The mechanism is ancient. The vigilance instinct, the visual noise, the loosening of cognitive control, all of it is biology doing what biology has always done. But what you do inside that moment, what you allow yourself to feel and think and finally acknowledge in the dark, that part is entirely yours. That part isn't ancestral programming. That part is you, choosing, every night, whether to meet yourself honestly or to drown the meeting out before it can begin. Most people will read this and still reach for their phone tonight. That's not a failure. That's simply what an overstimulated era has trained an entire species to do. But maybe, on one night soon, you'll let the silence stay a little longer. You'll let your eyes rest on that blank ceiling without filling the moment with noise. And in that stillness, something old and patient and entirely yours will finally have the chance to speak. The ceiling was never the point. It never had anything to offer you. It has no answers, no patterns, no meaning hidden in its blank surface. It is simply the last neutral space left in a world that has eliminated almost every other form of unstructured silence. And maybe that's exactly why your mind still goes there every night. Not because it expects to find something written on the ceiling, but because it knows that in the stillness beneath it, something inside you is still waiting to be heard. The sky disappeared a long time ago, but the part of you that used to search it every night before surrendering to sleep, that part never left. It's still looking, still scanning, still waiting.